An unexpected visit turned our ordinary day into a whirlwind when a man, claiming to be the executive chef of a high-end steakhouse, appeared at our front door. He insisted that my daughter had accumulated a bill of $4,770 and left without paying. This accusation seemed completely implausible to me. My name is Eleanor, and I'm 29 years old, living happily with my husband Michael and our daughter Riley. In the past, I was tricked by an ex-boyfriend who left me $4,770 in debt and pregnant. I reached out to him multiple times, but he disappeared. Eventually, he was caught and arrested. During this tough period, I met Michael, who was part of the investigation team. He was a pillar of strength and support. Despite our age difference and my past, Michael welcomed me with open arms. We got married, and now we share a loving home with supportive in-laws. They adore Riley, even though she isn't related to them by blood. One day, I received a warm call from Michael's parents, inviting us to visit. They expressed a longing to see their granddaughter. Our city life contrasts sharply with the slow-paced countryside where they live. When Michael came home that evening, I shared his parents' invitation. He hadn't taken any time off that month, so we decided to plan a visit to the countryside. That plan was suddenly interrupted by the chef's claim at our doorstep. I knew my daughter well enough to stand firm against the accusation, reflecting on how far I had come and the battles I had already fought and won. Michael and I had been looking forward to visiting his parents after a long hiatus. He quickly called his boss to ask for consecutive days off, and thankfully, his boss approved. However, on the day we were supposed to leave, an unexpected work emergency kept Michael at the office. He encouraged me to go ahead with our daughter, promising to follow as soon as he could, although he might not arrive until the next morning. I informed his parents about the change of plans and set off with Riley. Upon our arrival, Michael's parents welcomed us warmly, creating a cozy atmosphere that made us feel right at home. They were clearly excited for Michael's arrival, eagerly anticipating the moment when our family would be complete again. The next day, while the in-laws were out at the barn, I stayed at the house, enjoying a quiet morning. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. It was too early for Michael to have arrived, so I assumed it was a neighbor. "I'm coming," I called out as I hurried to the door. Opening it, I was confronted by a man in his 70s with a stern expression. "I own a local steakhouse, and your daughter dined and dashed at my place. You owe me $4,770, he declared abruptly. I was stunned, my mind racing as he continued to explain. According to him, a young girl had entered his steakhouse the previous night. Despite being cautioned that it was too expensive for her, she had proceeded to rack up a $4,770 bill and left without paying. He was adamant that as her parent, I was responsible for settling her debt. Trying to maintain composure, I asked for his name. "It's Mason," he replied sharply, pressing for immediate payment. I suggested checking with my in-laws to see if they recognized him or could shed some light on the situation. Mason was visibly annoyed by my response. "Shouldn't you be more concerned about paying first?" he retorted. "Yes, but I need to verify your claim," I replied, hoping to resolve the misunderstanding calmly and find out whether there had been some mistake about my daughter's involvement. "Could you please wait a second?" I urged the stern-looking man on my doorstep. As he impatiently tapped his foot, I hurriedly called my in-laws to verify his claim. They quickly cleared up a shocking detail that I tried not to reveal on my face. "I can't pay you," I said firmly after hanging up. "What do you mean you can't pay? Don't you care if my business suffers? If you don't settle this bill, I'm calling the police," he threatened. Just as he pulled out his phone, a police officer coincidentally walked by. Mason, the steakhouse owner, wasted no time drawing him into our dispute. The officer looked at me with a stern expression. "May I have a word with you? Your daughter is suspected of dining and dashing. If you don't resolve this, we'll have to take further action." "There must be some misunderstanding. My daughter wouldn't do something like this," I replied, feeling the weight of the officer's unwavering gaze. Mason, seeing my distress, softened a little. "Look, I'm not heartless. We're neighbors after all. If you can pay, I'll consider the matter settled." Mason, are you sure? I asked, incredulous. It doesn't really bother me. She's young, and I knew she couldn't pay. Isn't it an honor that she chose to eat at my restaurant? He chuckled, looking rather pleased with himself. The police officer, now less stern, offered, Mason's willing to resolve this without pressing charges. Why not just pay the $4,770 for the meal? It'll save your daughter from legal trouble. However, I still refused. As I began to explain, Mason's face turned red with fury. You're rejecting my generosity? Is this how you've raised your daughter? Don't test my patience. Please, calm down, I urged. There's no need for this hostility. If we can discuss this calmly, I'm sure we can clear up any misunderstandings. The officer, now puzzled by my refusal, asked, Why won't you settle this if it might lead to your daughter's arrest? The truth was, my in-laws had just informed me that no one fitting my daughter's description had been seen at the steakhouse. I knew something was off about Mason's claim. Determined to protect my daughter and uncover the truth, I stood firm against the pressure, ready to unravel the mystery surrounding this bizarre accusation. As I attempted to object, the steakhouse owner burst into laughter. Oh, sorry. You mean you don't have $4,770 right now? I forgot how forgetful we get as we age, he teased. He then suggested our restaurant accepts credit card payments. If you trust me with your card, I can process the payment for you and return it right after. How does that sound? He gestured for me to retrieve my wallet. Refusing, I expressed my discomfort with handing over my credit card to someone else and proposed that I accompany him to make the payment myself. At this, his demeanor shifted drastically. He raised his fist and yelled, Don't you trust me? I'm in the credit business. Be careful with your words, or you'll regret it. Why can't I come with you? I asked, hoping to ease the tension. Because you're disrespecting me, he shouted back. Listen, I'm well connected with influential organizations around here. If you can't pay up now, I have ways to make sure you do, he threatened, indicating that he had even involved a police officer to handle things legally. I was stunned by his audacity, especially in front of law enforcement. Glancing at the police officer, I noticed him turning away, seemingly ignoring the situation. Excuse me, you're a police officer, right? Did you hear that? This is a threat, isn't it? Is this acceptable? I implored for intervention. The officer, looking troubled, responded quietly. I didn't hear anything. Anyway, if you just pay the money, all this can be settled. Eleanor, please do as you're told. Shocked by his response, I couldn't believe a police officer would behave in such a manner. The steakhouse owner continued his tirade, his words growing more intimidating. Most people would feel compelled to pay just to end such a confrontation, but I stood my ground. Why are you siding with him? Aren't police officers supposed to protect us? I asked desperately. The officer simply looked away, not offering a single word in my defense. As the tension mounted, I felt increasingly isolated. Both the police officer and the steakhouse owner were pressuring me, but something didn't feel right. I resolved not to let their intimidation tactics sway me, determined to uncover the truth behind these alarming accusations. As I stood firm in my refusal to pay the steep bill, the steakhouse owner, glaring intensely, challenged me. Make up your mind. Just because I'm old, don't take me lightly, he demanded. It wasn't that I underestimated him. The whole situation just seemed too absurd, so I continued to resist. Before I could muster any explanation, which I doubted they'd let me articulate, a taxi pulled up to the curb. My husband, Michael, emerged, looking perplexed as he surveyed the tense scene. What's going on here? Who are these people? He asked. Is this your husband? You need to take responsibility, the steakhouse owner addressed Michael, prompting the police officer to explain the situation. Michael shot me a look of surprise, and when I responded with a frown of confusion, he seemed to grasp the gravity of the scene, his face breaking into a mischievous grin, a playful trait I've always cherished in him. Sorry for the trouble, Michael began, addressing the officer. By the way, which department are you from? Do you have a police badge? Caught off guard, the officer hesitated but then produced a badge from his pocket. Michael inspected it closely. This looks fake, he said, causing the officer to start sweating. Just kidding, Michael chuckled, seeing the officer's anxious reaction. The officer, relieved but still tense, managed a nervous smile. Michael then inquired about his department and rank. Just curious, can't you tell me? He pressed gently. Oh, well, I'm a constable on duty at the police box, the officer replied. I've never seen you before. Are you new around here? Michael continued, thanking him for his service. Yes, I'm still quite new, the officer admitted. And would you mind if I contacted your station? Is it okay to use the name on your badge, Grayson Martin? Michael asked, already pulling out his phone. Before he could dial, the officer quickly interjected, grabbing Michael's hand. About the issue with Mason, could we discuss this first? He pleaded, eager to resolve the escalating situation. Michael nodded, putting his phone away for the moment, ready to untangle the mess with a calm and calculated approach. The scene had turned into an unexpected confrontation, but with Michael's timely arrival, I felt a renewed sense of hope that we could clear up the misunderstanding and reveal the truth behind the allegations. As the steakhouse owner, Mason, and the police officer pressed for a resolution, my husband Michael calmly faced them. The air was thick with tension, and Mason, who had initially come on strong, now seemed overwhelmed by Michael's composed demeanor. You're the husband, right? Take responsibility, Mason insisted, his earlier fierceness fading into a mix of frustration and desperation. Yes, but I don't know. He casually shrugged it off before adding, Oh, one last thing, can you tell me your gun's serial number? The question caught the officer off guard. Why? That's not something I can easily disclose. Doesn't knowing the number mean anything will happen? Or did you forget that this is a common verification method? Michael challenged, his tone serious. The officer tilted his head, clearly thrown by Michael's persistence, while I watched, my suspicion growing. It was clear that something was off about these two. By the way, would you mind if I shared my thoughts on this dine and dash incident? Michael continued, fixing them both with a stern gaze that seemed to confuse them further. Let's conclude this, you're a fake cop, trying to scam us alongside this gentleman, aren't you? Michael's accusation was direct and forceful. The two men were visibly taken aback. Do you have any evidence? Show me proof that I'm lying, Mason demanded. At Michael's nod, I hurried to the back and returned with our youngest family member. Holding our 1-year-old daughter in my arms, I stepped forward, shielding her slightly behind Michael. My daughter is just 1 year old. She can't even walk, let alone dine and dash, I stated firmly. The revelation left Mason and the officer speechless, their mouths agape in shock. No, that's a lie. Is that child really Arya Taylor? Mason stammered. Of course. I'm only 29 years old. If she wasn't my first, at what age do you suppose I would have had my first child? I countered, watching as doubt crept into Mason's expression. Realizing their mistake, Mason glanced at the officer, who returned his look with a nod, perhaps realizing their plan had unraveled. Oh, it seems that the dine and dasher was someone else. My apologies, the officer quickly corrected, his tone shifting as both he and Mason prepared to leave, their scam thwarted and their composure broken by the simple truth revealed in our living room. Then Michael sprang into action, blocking their path to prevent them from escaping. I quickly stepped back to the entrance, watching the unfolding scene through a gap in the door. Could you perhaps let me through? The supposed officer pleaded. No, we won't let you escape. You might be scammers. We can't allow it, Michael responded firmly. Don't mess with me. I'm a police officer. If you don't let me through, I'll arrest you for obstructing an investigation, the man threatened, attempting to push past Michael. However, Michael deftly moved to block him again. My apologies for not introducing myself earlier. I'm Michael, Chief Executive Officer, CEO Michael declared, pulling out his genuine, gleaming police badge, a stark contrast to the flimsy one the young officer had shown earlier. What? Liar! I'm the real deal, the young man blustered. Real or not, you've committed fraud, haven't you? It's a disgrace for a police officer. Do you understand what the investigation division does? Michael countered. He quickly outlined the division's role in handling intelligent crimes like fraud, embezzlement, counterfeit money, election violations, financial crimes, defamation, and high-tech crimes, precisely the type of crimes the young man was involved in. With that, Michael swiftly handcuffed the two, who were too stunned to resist the sudden turn of events. Once secured, Michael pulled out his phone. I've apprehended fraudsters on the spot. This is outside my jurisdiction, so please send officers from the designated area here immediately. Hearing Michael's authoritative call, the faces of the two scammers turned ashen. Please forgive us. We were just desperate for money. It's our first offense. Please let us go, they pleaded. Just then, my in-laws arrived with additional police support. Are you okay? Sorry we're late. This guy couldn't explain things properly, they said, relieved to find us safe. What a relief you're here too, my mother-in-law exclaimed, pulling me and our daughter into a warm hug, grateful that the ordeal was finally over. The entire ordeal had me on edge, but as the two men were loaded into the police car, I could finally let go of the tension and breathe a sigh of relief. Initially, I suspected only the older man, Mason, was involved in the fraud. When I reached out to my in-laws to inquire if they knew someone by that name, they couldn't place him. Given that they have lived in our community for years and know practically everyone, it was clear Mason didn't belong here. Moreover, it was absurd to think my 1-year-old daughter could have been involved in any dine and dash incident. I hadn't explicitly asked my in-laws to call the police, but they had understood the gravity of the situation and made the decision on their own. As I awaited their arrival with law enforcement, every minute with the imposter police officer and Mason was fraught with anxiety. Yet deep down, I was determined to protect my daughter no matter what. The man posing as a police officer didn't sit right with me from the moment he appeared, and my suspicions only grew during our conversation. Luckily, Michael arrived in time, and through his keen questioning, it became evident that the officer was a fraud. I shuddered to think what might have happened had Michael not been there. Thankfully, the real police took over, and the case against the two fraudsters quickly escalated as more charges were piled on them. Michael shared the details with me later, his voice a mix of sadness and anger. It turned out that these scammers weren't part of any larger criminal organization, but their actions had gained national attention, their faces plastered across the news. Thanks to the swift action and thoughtfulness of Michael and my in-laws, I was able to stay at their home for an extra day to recover from the ordeal. News of Michael's heroic actions spread fast, and soon our neighbors, showing their support and relief, brought over an array of fancy dishes. The impromptu gathering evolved into a joyous celebration. Our daughter, oblivious to the earlier tensions, was thoroughly enjoying herself, not shedding a single tear that evening. As the party carried on, I found a quiet moment to watch my daughter, her innocent face a stark contrast to the day's complexities. In that moment, amidst the laughter and chatter, I savored the profound relief and happiness that had settled over me, grateful for the security and love of our family and community.